Good morning, or whatever time it is wherever you are. I'm sorry we're not all able to be in the same place. It is a really profound honor to be the inaugural Elman Prize winner. I'll say a lot more about that during my talk today. But I wanted to begin my talk with a traditional Jewish condolence. May his memory be a blessing. Those words are the inspiration for this talk. Many people in this audience, I think, I don't know who's in the audience, but many people in the CogSci community were very close to Jeff, his longtime friends, collaborators, students. There are a lot of people out there who really, really loved him. There are also many people in this audience who didn't know Jeff, never overlapped with him in person. Maybe you know his work, maybe you don't. Since this is the first Elman Symposium, I'm going to take advantage of that privilege to spend my time talking about Jeff and his impact on the field, and of course how it intersects with my own career and my own views about academia. But first, before I talk about Jeff, I want to thank the other speakers in this symposium, my wonderful, fabulous former and always students and postdoc. I don't know what they said. I haven't heard their talks. I would imagine that if I knew what they said, I would be super blushing right now. So I'm probably just going to blush anyway. But I really want to thank them for participating in this symposium, and especially Eric, my very first graduate student, for organizing this symposium. I also want to thank Bob Glushko. Many of you may not know that Bob was the inspiration behind the Elman Prize. Bob did his PhD at UCSD and actually knew Jeff Jeff Elman since he arrived at UCSD as a faculty member. I think that was in 1977 when Jeff arrived as an assistant professor of linguistics. Jeff later co-founded the world's first department of cognitive science before later becoming a dean and engaging in many other important service activities at UCSD. Jeff proposed the idea of the Glushko Prize to Bob and convinced Bob to that it was okay to call it Glushko. So those of you Glushko Prize winners who are in this audience, you actually have Jeff to thank for that. I've served on the Glushko Prize committee for several years now, and so I know just how impressive the applicants for that prize are, those who win and those who don't win. After Jeff's untimely death, it was Bob Glushko, who proposed the Elman Prize as something like something to kind of bridge the gap between the Glushko Prize for graduate students and the Remmel Hart Prize for esteemed senior faculty. And when he proposed it, he hoped it would first be awarded in 2020. So here we are. I also want to thank other entities who've helped to fund this prize, including the UCSD community, the Cognitive Science Society, and other donors. And I'd also really like to thank the people who organized this now virtual conference. As someone who has organized conferences, I know just how much work goes into it, and you've done an amazing job in making this happen, letting us come together as a community, even though we can't actually be together as a community. Okay, so the Elman Prize. I think I might need to move this little thing around. When I found out that I had won the prize, I sobbed for a really long time. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The reasons come in the name of the prize. So one of the reasons has to do with it being about Jeff, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Scientific achievement, great, that's super cool. The community building part, that's especially meaningful to me. I know that when Bob Glushko proposed this prize in honor of Jeff Elman, he really wanted it to focus on things like building our scientific community, mentoring, teaching, engaging young scientists. And to be honored for that, I think matters especially much to me. The reason I burst into tears, I don't think we're supposed to be personal in these talks, but what the heck, this is virtual and I can't see your faces, so I'm going to be personal. Jeff was something of a legend in my family for something that he did. My mother was Eleanor Saffran. Some of you may recognize her name. She was an extremely eminent cognitive neuropsychologist who studied aphasia and other dementia, other aspects of cognitive decline. And she and my father, who was also a professor, went to UCSD on sabbatical in around 1992. And my mom was in residence at the Center for Research on Language, which was another of the organizations that Jeff helped to found. And my parents they were kind of broken when they went to UCSD. My sister, my only sibling, died of cancer when she was 19, about a year and a half before my parents went to San Diego. And they were broken. They were in a really bad shape. And Jeff reached out to them. He reached out to my mother in ways that she never expected him to do. And I still remember over the course of that year, talking to my parents and hearing them say just how kind a person he was. He didn't really know my mom before this. And it was a year that helped to heal my parents. And so I will forever be grateful to Jeff for his role in that, along with some of his other colleagues at UCSD, Gary Cottrell in particular. So in my talk today, I'm going to talk about the impact of Jeff's scholarship through the lens of my own perspective, of course. I'm going to talk about Jeff's humanity. I've done that a little bit already, but I will do that mostly through the perspective of his students and colleagues, because I never had the pleasure of working with Jeff myself. And then I'm going to end with sort of lessons from Jeff's life about how to be a mensch in academia. The word mensch is a Yiddish word, and like many Yiddish words, for those of you who don't know the language Yiddish, it's a historically Jewish language that sort of came out of a combination of German and Hebrew. Yiddish is notorious for having words that don't translate. And there really isn't a one-to-one translation for mensch into English. And my hope is if you learn nothing else from this talk today, you learn what mensch means by the analogy and the examples that I'm going to give from Jeff's students and from his life. Okay. So I first learned about Jeff's research in a graduate seminar at the University of Rochester in around, I think it was either 1992 or 1993. I believe Robbie Jacobs was teaching this class. It was a class on sort of computational models, focusing a lot on connectionism. I wasn't familiar with that kind of work prior to starting graduate school, but I was really interested in how babies learn and how babies learn language in particular. It's a very long-standing interest to me. And I recall sitting in this graduate class, and we had been reading, before we got to Jeff's paper, we had been reading articles about backpropagation and sort of the classic PDP books about that really started a lot of the important research on connectionist approaches. And in, this is so old school, some of you might not even know about this stuff, but in the classic PDP kinds of models, there's an external teacher. So there's an external error signal that tells the model when it's correct and when it's incorrect. And we've been talking a lot about how biologically implausible and sort of cognitively implausible that was in the course of this class. So then we started reading Jeff's paper, and people in the class started saying, this seems so much more plausible, biologically plausible. And I was sitting there thinking, really? How? And then, you know, the brilliance of Jeff's work connected with my mind. And I realized, as everyone else in the class did sort of before I did, that the idea that maybe part of how we learn is by generating predictions about what's going to come next, and then implicitly comparing what actually happens next in time to what actually happens, comparing one's prediction to what actually happens provides an error signal that can backpropagate in time and allow you to figure out what's right and what's wrong. This blew my mind. As a possible way to solve some of the intractable problems that I've been learning about in my other classes, like the lack of negative evidence for language acquisition, the fact that parents don't correct infants. And so in fact, my very first publication was with Michael Spivey, my fellow graduate student, and it was my first conference presentation as well, based on graduate school work, where Michael and I actually wanted to test out some of these hypotheses, doing a little bit of modeling to ask whether learning might be faster in the absence of an explicit teacher. In fact, whether learning would be faster by detecting one's implicit errors. You might notice that for those of you who are younger in the field than I am, the format for COG Sci proceedings is the same now as it was in 1995. So that's kind of entertaining too. At any rate, I continue to be fascinated by these questions of implicit learning and prediction. I didn't meet Jeff until the next year at COG Sci, when I noticed this guy like walking around in shorts, and he seemed to be in charge of a lot of stuff. And it was Jeff, and I just didn't know that famous people would walk around in shorts at conferences, and it was really cool. So Jeff obviously went on to do tremendous amounts of important work in really, really important areas that are widely cited. And of course, he's now inspired a great deal of research in deep learning and other sorts of computational language applications. I'm not going to talk more about that because I'm guessing you're all more familiar with those things. What I'd like to turn to now is thinking more about the ways in which Jeff impacted people in our field as human beings. And to do that, I'm going to have you read their words because I never had the pleasure of working with Jeff. So here you go. I move my face. This next one was provided anonymously. Thank you to my friends for providing their thoughtful words. Okay, so I've been talking about being a mensch. What's a mensch? How can you be a mensch in academia, a good person? Well, the first is to give credit where credit is due. I think this is something that Jeff really did a good job of doing. He shared the credit with his students, his colleagues, other forebears of his ideas. And so I want to do the same thing here and thank my own, the people to whom I owe all of the credit, who have done all of the work, my graduate students and postdocs who I treat as junior colleagues and collaborators from the day they land on campus. And then especially my mentors in graduate school, Dick Aslow and Alyssa Newport, without whom none of this would be possible, and my undergrad mentor, Jim Morgan, who got me started. Be bold and hold your ground, but be kind while you're doing it. I think this really exemplifies Jeff. If you make a mistake, apologize. Say no if you have to, especially right now in COVID. But if you can step up, step up. We need you. Have a life, which Jeff abundantly did with his husband, Ray, and his kids and his many hobbies. Own power dynamics and check your privilege. I'm running out of time. And above all, don't be an asshole. Thank you, Dick Aslow, for those words. Let's raise a glass to Jeff. Thank you so much.